We've all heard about hotels asking us to reuse our towels to save the planet. But what if tourism went far beyond that? What if travel could actually heal the places we visit, restoring ecosystems, empowering communities, and creating a net positive impact? In this episode, we uncover the hidden potential of tourism that doesn't just sustain, but regenerates. Are you ready to rethink the way we travel? Tune in to this week's episode of the Flywheel Economics podcast. Welcome to the Flywheel Economics podcast. Flywheel Economics is a concept that proposes true, sustainable economic growth by viewing economies as ecosystems. I'm your host, Richard O.
And I'm your co-host, Favour Ogbadu. Together, let's explore a more sustainable and powerful way to view innovation, investment, and economic policymaking. Our last episode of 2024 was the regenerative advantage, and it was an episode that covered regenerative agriculture. We had a particular case study in Nigeria, that's the SCL farms. And we all know that that is something Richard is still jealous about, the fact that I got to go and see exactly how it is done. Regenerative agriculture, amongst many other things, is a holistic land management practice that focuses on improving soil health. And that episode was really eye-opening. And we really got to see some major key takeaways. And it was so strong that we haven't gotten over it yet. Isn't that right, Richard?
It is. And I'm spotting a bit of a trend here because today's episode is about regenerative tourism. And when I did one of my previous roles working in the Commonwealth Secretariat, my team started to look into this area of regenerative tourism. And similarly to your visit to the farm without me, not wishing to rub that point in, but my team managed to go off to Belize to explore regenerative tourism in Belize without me as well. And if you think I was jealous of your farm trip in Abuja, I was 100 times more jealous of their trip to Belize to see more about sustainable and regenerative tourism favor. So yes, big jealousy seems to be linked from me and anything regenerative. But I'm really excited about this episode. I'm excited about all our episodes, but this one is particularly important because many people have heard about regenerative agriculture, but far fewer people have heard about regenerative tourism. And hopefully this is our opportunity to explore that in a lot more detail. Does that sound good, Favour?
Yes, it does. And I particularly feel excited about the concept of what that would look like. I mean, the more popular one is regenerative agriculture, but when thinking about it through the lens of tourism, what does that even look like? Another thing that's really fascinating for me is that when we talk about tourism, there seems to be like a lot of concentration in small states. Like a lot of small states are into tourism. But it got me thinking that what does it really mean to be a small state? And of course, I'm going to have to turn to the experts. For some of us that might not know, Richard was actually the head of small states at the Commonwealth Secretariat. So, experts, what do we, when we say small states, what exactly do we mean?
Okay, well, firstly, Favour, I'll stop you right there. I wouldn't describe myself as an expert by any measure. I did have the privilege to be head of economic policy in small states at the Secretariat for a year or so. And that was quite a unique part of my career because mostly I've been working on very large states like Nigeria with a population of over 200 million, Pakistan, 230 or so million. So it's a rather unique point in my career, but it was a very rich time because with small states in the Commonwealth is quite uniquely placed. There are 56 member states in the Commonwealth and 33 of them are what we describe as small states. Now, the definition by the Commonwealth of a small state is a country with a population of less than 1.5 million. Although it's not a very strict definition because they also include countries like Botswana, Jamaica, Lesotho, countries with slightly bigger populations, but who share similar characteristics with the small states. And those characteristics are usually around their vulnerabilities, whether those are economic vulnerabilities, that could be a concentration of their economy in a few small sectors, or whether that's climate vulnerability in terms of their vulnerability towards extreme weather conditions, hurricanes, if you're in the Caribbean, or whatever else. So it was a really enriching period to be able to learn about the unique challenges these small states face. And of course, for so many of them, as you rightly point out, Favour, tourism is so important. And the intellectual challenge as an economist trying to take the flywheel economics approach, is how do you build resilience when your economy is concentrated in one or two key sectors? And of course, one of the key ways you build resilience is through diversification. But actually, it's quite hard. It can feel like it's quite hard to diversify when you're working at such a small scale. But there's an analogy I like to use, again, stolen from the garden. You can have diversification in the same types of plants, right? You can have different fruit trees, different varieties of fruit trees, or you may have a patch of daffodils in your garden, but they can be different varieties within that. And that's how I like to look at small states as well. You could have tourism, but you can have different flavors of tourism within your economy, and that can help build resilience as well. But why I like regenerative tourism, Favour, is that it has that opportunity to build that stronger resilience in both the economic sphere, but also the environmental sphere as well. So I'm really looking forward to this episode with Dr. Tamara, who's really going to take us through some quite cutting edge research that the Commonwealth have done on regenerative tourism. But Favour, what's your idea about regenerative tourism and eco-tourism, sustainable tourism? What kind of impression do you get of it when you think of the kind of things that might mean?
Yeah, I'm particularly excited about this episode as well, because for me, when I think about traveling, I do not really think about the impact that I make. I'm thinking of the impact that's going to be made on me. Oh, am I going to have a fun time? Am I going to enjoy myself? So it's really eye-opening to realize that, okay, when you travel, we tend more to focus on our homes, where you live, where you spend majority of your time in. But one thing we have to realize is that when we travel, we are going to other people's homes, and the same way we would want our home to be treated, which goes beyond not washing our bed sheets every day or towels every day. But how can we leave a legacy in a place where we have visited, to ensure that for the people that is their homes, they don't suffer loss as a result of our visits? So that's why I'm particularly excited about this episode and cannot wait to explore it.
Yeah, and I agree. There's nothing, for decades now, hotels have had little signs saying about, help us save the planet by not washing your towels every day or not washing your bed sheets every day. And that's great. And it will have some impact because a lot of energy and resources are wasted in overwashing these things. But it's one of those policies which is also, is also going to cut costs for the hotel that you're in by doing it. So they've obviously got a financial incentive to do that. And it does feel a little bit uninspiring in terms of, is this the extent of what ecotourism is? Is this the extent of what sustainable tourism is? It's just not washing your bed sheets or your towels as much. And I think what's beautiful about regenerative tourism is it challenges that a lot further, and it tries to come up with ways of restoring ecosystems, and it tries to really dig deeper for a lot more inspiration around what this could be. So I'm really excited to learn what Tamara has found in some of her research, and look forward to going on that journey with her.
Yes, exactly. And I know our listeners feel the same way. So let's get into the interview.
Tamara, welcome to the podcast. Could you start by introducing yourself and your role at the Commonwealth Secretariat, also the inspiration behind the latest Small States Economic Review?
Okay, thank you, Richard, and thank you for having me on your podcast. So my name is Tamara Mughogho. I work as an economic advisor in the Economic Policy and Small States section. So my work largely involves providing technical assistance to member countries, supporting in high-level meetings, and supporting in any other work as may be required by the section. So just to give a brief recap of the Small States Economic Review that you have mentioned. So this report was launched during the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, which was held in October in Samoa. So under the CHOGM, which is the acronym for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, the theme was on building resilience. So that's why for the Small States Economic Review, we thought it fitting that it should also be centered around the theme of building resilience. So in this regard, the theme for the whole Small States Economic Review was building resilience in small states. So as a special topic for this, we decided to focus on sustainable and regenerative tourism in small states, because we felt that this was one of the ways in which small states can actually build resilience in their economies.
Okay, so sustainable tourism and regenerative tourism are often used interchangeably, but do they actually mean the same thing, Tamara? Can you explain the difference and similarities and why the distinction matters?
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, to start with, one would say that both of them are somewhat similar because at the end of the day, they all focus on environmental protection as well as the community engagement in tourism. However, the main difference is in the terms of approach. While sustainable tourism mostly focuses on protecting the environment, regenerative tourism goes beyond that. So instead of just saying we want to protect our environment, it actually stipulates that we need to go beyond that, and then tourism should actually help leave things better off. Tourists should actually help leave things better off than they find them. So in this sense, regenerative tourism goes beyond, and it's a bit more proactive, I should say. It focuses on the positive impact as well as improving systems, be it ecosystems or the community systems. So in this sense, regenerative tourism was more holistic. It focuses on restoration, and it goes beyond just looking at tourism as an industry. But in a sense, tourism is viewed as a whole living system that enables communities and ecosystems to evolve. So in this sense, another difference one may consider, in sustainable tourism, the communities are brought in for consultations. So they're largely just consulted in certain aspects of activities or strategies. Whereas for regenerative tourism, the communities actually play a more active role in the sense that they're actually involved in the decision-making processes. So as you can see from this, they're quite similar, but at the same time, very different. So I think it's important to actually distinguish between the two, particularly when developing our policies. In this sense, because regenerative tourism goes beyond, you can actually develop policies that are more impactful, initiatives that actually help to address the root causes of, let's say, degradation, if you actually want to restore the environment. So in this case, knowing the differences between the two is actually helpful in the sense that it helps in our strategies as to how we can actually enhance either of these initiatives.
Okay, so this sounds like it's going a bit beyond just not washing your towels every day in the hotel or not having your bed linen changed. It's going well beyond that. So can you give a few examples of sustainable and regenerative practices that small states are adopting in their tourism sectors, and what sets these practices apart?
Okay, all right. Well, to start with, at the very minor level, it starts with these small things, like, for instance, just setting standards or guidelines of green practices, for instances. This can be set, let's say, at the higher level. Maybe the ministries of tourism can set aside guidelines for tourism operators. And then it's small things, like you mentioned, like, let's say, promoting recycling, reducing single-use plastics. These are at the lower level, I should say. Then we start moving forward to things like promoting farm-to-table approaches, where, let's say, hotels are encouraged to grow their own agricultural produce, which can then be used to feed the guests at the hotels. And then going beyond that, and not only saying, okay, we're going to be encouraging tourists to, let's say, be more green, use more green transportation, but actually going beyond and saying, okay, let's educate tourists on how we're actually helping to conserve the environment, what role the tourists can play. So there's actually the aspect of also educating tourists as well. And then going further beyond that, there's now looking at, okay, how do we restore the natural resources which attract tourists to our countries? So we look at, let's say, protecting land resources, protecting marine resources, and even restoring the very resources, for instance, like restoration of coral reefs. So at a larger scale, these are like some of the initiatives. And then going forward as well, looking at how we can make a positive impact. There are certain initiatives which actually suggest that when tourists are coming to certain countries, they are required or requested, not required, but more or less requested because it is voluntary. When they're packing their luggage, they pack a little bit of something to help the communities where they'll be visiting. So this could be school supplies to help for the educational facilities in the local communities, even just basic things like clothing. So it starts from the lowest levels and it gets grander and grander as we go, depending on the different initiatives, so to speak. So there are a wide range of initiatives that Commonwealth small states are implementing, I should say.
Thanks, Tamara. So interestingly, it sounds like it's not even just about the environmental rebuilding that happens from it, but also with communities and livelihoods as well, that encouragement of people to buy from local communities too. Are there any standout examples of regenerative tourism in Commonwealth small states that have delivered significant economic, environmental, or social benefits that you're aware of?
Okay. First of all, just to start with maybe the environmental benefits, because I think that is the most prevalent one. For instance, there's been large success with regards to, like, let's say, restoration of like the coral reefs in some of our small states, which have got large areas of coral reefs. For instance, countries like Seychelles, Samoa, and Fiji. So by helping to restore these coral reefs, we're not just helping just to restore for the environment, but these coral reefs are also a very important source of livelihoods. For instance, you have those fishing communities that live around those areas. They're able to benefit because, in the sense that it also helps the fisheries industries in this sense. It helps the livelihoods of those communities that are living along the beaches. So there are this sort of like multiplier effects which start from like the higher level of just say, okay, we're going to help the environment, but then it's actually benefiting the local communities who in turn benefit from these, should say, industries that are also like sort of like interlinked with tourism. And as mentioned before, like the Pack a Pound initiatives, it has proved to be very beneficial in supporting like very vulnerable tiers of society who otherwise maybe will not have had those access to certain resources, I should say. And also going forward to some other success stories, I should say, for instance, with regards to like tangible regeneration of the environment. You have cases of countries like Barbados who have been successful in transforming one of their quarry mines into an eco-resort. So before, this was a quarry mine, and we know mining is mostly like an extractive industry, and in some cases it does more harm than good, but they managed to successfully transform it into an eco-tourism resort. So in this case, like, it's helping to protect the environment, but at the same time, it is also helping like to generate revenues for those people who are living in those communities and so forth. So this is just another example. And another more general example of a success story in helping to regenerate the environment for tourism would be the Cousin Islands success story. So this is the island in Seychelles. It's actually, it's called one of the first natural islands. So basically what they did was, in the 1960s, the government declared it to be a national a reserve. So in this sense, they put aside a policy which says that you cannot take anything away from the island. Instead, they started to introduce like certain bird species and so forth. And over the years, there's been like a large increase in those bird species. So now it's like one of the success stories of an area which before had been lacking in biodiversity. But because of the specific policies that the government put in place, now it's flourishing and it's actually been restored. So the environment is flourishing, the biodiversity is flourishing. So these are just some of the examples that I should say, where you can see tangible environmental benefits, where you can see even the social benefits and even like the economic benefits. Because at the end of the day, when we're improving the natural resources, that is what draws tourism to most of these small states. So in this case, we're sort of safeguarding the future of tourism by helping to protect the biodiversity and helping to regenerate it, I should say.
Thanks, Tamara. The benefits of it sound really strong. It sounds like a progressive and, multifaceted in terms of the benefits approach to take. It also sounds like it could potentially be quite costly and involve some degree of investment from the tourism sector. Financing is often a key concern for implementing new practices. Can you provide some insight into how small states can finance sustainable and regenerative tourism? Are there specific funding mechanisms or partnerships that are proving effective with the small states you're working with?
Yes, indeed. You're quite right in saying that financing is a challenge for small states. So just to start with, at the basic level, the basic sources of financing that small states can benefit for to help support sustainable regenerative tourism, it starts at the basic core, let's say the revenue gained from tourist arrivals. So this could be like revenues from even like departure taxes, for instance, taxes placed on cruise tourism, or even like ticket prices for people who want to visit like national parks and other tourism enterprises. So at the very basic level, the revenue generated from tourism provides a very valuable source of financing for sustainable and regenerative tourism. The only challenge with this is that in most cases, you find that tourism is seasonal. Like for some of the countries, I'll give an example for some of the Commonwealth small states countries, let's say the Caribbean countries. They're very prone to like climate shocks like hurricanes and so forth. So during the hurricane season, that means tourism almost comes to a standstill. So they hardly get a lot of tourism revenue in that case. So in that sense, that there'll be a gap in that year. They won't be having that inflow of funding that'll be coming in normally. So to build the gap, that's where in some cases, some countries will have like some sort of reserves, which they'll be accumulating over the year to sort of like help to like smooth out the consumption or smooth out the expenditure throughout. And then going beyond the tourism revenue, there are also options of applying for grants. In some cases, like countries like Belize, they rely on, for some of them, the partners working on regenerative tourism, they offer grants and so forth, and also even like leveraging on financing from multilateral partners. That has also proved to be very useful. And even going beyond looking at other sources of financing, like public-private partnerships as well, that also has proved to be useful. And just to also highlight that nowadays, okay, I shouldn't say nowadays, but then Commonwealth small states have been at the forefront at leveraging other sources of financing, for instance, using blue bonds. So through these blue bonds, which are a type of debt for nature swaps, Commonwealth small states have been able to like generate substantive income to help them boost their initiatives in sustainable and regenerative tourism. So just to give an example, Seychelles was actually the first country in the world to implement a blue bond, and then it was followed by other countries like Belize, Fiji, and I hear Seychelles is planning again to implement another blue bond. So this just shows how successful these initiatives are. So these are just some of the ways that countries can actually innovate to enhance the financing for sustainable tourism. And even going beyond that, just trying to see, okay, what other innovative financing tools can we use? There are so many options. So it's just best for countries to see, okay, what would work best for our countries and try and see how they can leverage that to support their endeavors.
Okay, you mentioned a term in there, Tamara, of blue bonds and debt for nature swaps. Can you explain a bit what a blue bond and a debt for nature swap, what they are?
Okay, so basically a debt for nature swap is where a country, let's say a country who is largely indebted. So instead of like repaying the bond, they actually say, okay, repaying the debt, they actually say, okay, we're going to implement certain initiatives that are actually supportive of the environment, certain initiatives to help conserve the environment. So for instance, this was done in Belize. They actually traded in some of their debt in exchange for some of these like climatic mitigation agreements, I should say. So in this sense, by trading in some of their debt, that means the money that was supposed to be spent on repaying the debt, that money has been freed up to be used to other things. So in these cases, these countries no longer have the debt burdens. They actually have money which they can use to actually also further enhance the environmental protection initiatives, whether it's protecting the marine life or whether it's protecting the natural resources. So in most cases, if it's a blue bond, that means it's largely focusing on protecting the marine life or the blue economy, I should say. So in a nutshell, this is what a blue bond or debt for nature swap is.
Thanks, Tamara. You mentioned earlier the challenges around the seasonality of tourism and how that can put a challenge on the financing. But what other challenges does regenerative tourism face for small states? What are the biggest challenges, and in terms of adopting the regenerative practices, and how can these be addressed to ensure long-term success?
Yeah, so apart from the limited financial resources, I think also the vulnerability to climate change in itself, in as much as countries may be pushing to promote these initiatives that help to restore the environment, but then if they're constantly being bombarded by climatic shocks, this sort of undermines their regenerative efforts if they're sort of like fighting and then something keeps like pushing them back. So in this case, I think best would be to enhance the climate adaptation, enhance climate mitigation, and also just to enhance disaster preparedness so that at least they are prepared beforehand for the disaster. And then hopefully this can help them to be able to handle it more. And then also just to add, another challenge that small states face would be the limited institutional capacity. So just to give a background, most of our small states in the Commonwealth are very small. Some of them maybe have a population of, let's say, 400,000. So that means that there's limited even human capacity to sort of implement some of these initiatives. So in this sense, capacity challenges are an issue. And then there'll be need for like capacity building as well as knowledge sharing like across with different countries. And for, let's say, multilateral partners to be able to like provide technical assistance for these member states who are like, who have got limited capacity to sort of help them to advance their initiatives. And last but not least, I would say the issue of awareness as well at the community level. I think it's also something that that could be an issue. Let's say, for instance, where they're advancing initiatives where the community can be more involved, but then maybe there's limited awareness or there's limited community buy-in, for instance. So in this case, the issue of raising awareness, the issue of promoting education and helping to incentivize participation of the communities is something that I think would be crucial. And also just fostering that inclusive planning. So one country that is doing quite well in this is Seychelles with regards to like educating people on sustainable and regenerative tourism or even just the benefits of tourism. So apparently even at primary school level, they already start educating people at this level. So in this sense, the community is already brought in from the grassroots level. And as things move forward, there's already that buy-in, there's already that awareness, I should say. So this is quite helpful. So in a nutshell, there may be more other challenges, but I think these are some of the key challenges that can sort of limit countries in advancing with their initiatives.
Thank you very much. What role do government policies and international partnerships play in supporting regenerative tourism? And are there specific examples where policy interventions have made a significant impact?
Okay. So at the government level, I think the most important thing for the government at the macro level would be to, first of all, set out specific strategies. I believe that without a specific guideline in place, any initiatives can be futile. So at least if there are national strategies that are actually put in place that actually guide how things should operate, I think this is something that should be crucial at the starting stage. And then going beneath that, after we have like the national policies, we have the national strategies. Now going back to the issue of guidelines, as I mentioned earlier, just setting in place proper guidelines to sort of help tourism enterprises in their efforts. And apart from just having the guidelines as well, putting in place incentives, because we can have guidelines and then people may not necessarily follow them. So I think it's also important to have the incentives in place, and many countries actually do this. So they have incentives for different, let's say hotels, those that are very green, they give them awards. So in a way, this sort of like motivates other enterprises to be more green, to be more sustainable, and actually to promote tourism that is actually more regenerative. And then going to the next part on the international partnerships, I think this one is very crucial because when you're looking at sustainable and regenerative tourism, looking at it from the environmental perspective, so to speak, let's say if a country is striving to restore its environment or to protect its environment, most of these natural resources, you find that they're shared. For instance, if it's the marine resources, the oceans are shared. So it's good for countries to be able to form these partnerships, to be able to have like efforts that are speaking to each other and they're working together in tandem. Even like the natural resources, you find the land resources, you find that in most cases, like most of the ecosystems for countries that are bordering each other, they're shared. So in this case, it is crucial for countries to be able to work together with some of these efforts. And even going beyond that, countries should also be leveraging, working with other multilateral partners who are working in this sphere So this is not just looking at the regional international partnerships, but then looking at the global international partnerships as well, learning from each other. As I mentioned before, I think this is something that is very crucial. In as much as each country is unique, each country is different, but I think countries can still learn from each other, I should say. And going to your last question about the specific successes with regards to policies, well, I can't say specifically for each policy, but then I can just speak at a general level for some of the countries that are advancing with regards to sustainable and regenerative tourism. So for some of the countries who actually have like good policy frameworks in place, are taking a very forward-looking stance at regenerative tourism. For instance, like Seychelles, they're actually doing quite well. There have been major successes that they've experienced since they've started being more forthcoming with these initiatives. Like I mentioned earlier, they've managed to like restore their coral reefs. They've had like success stories with some of their reserves as well. And even for other countries like Belize, who also has a very forward approach to sustainable and regenerative tourism, they have been very successful in their various initiatives. For instance, just last year, Belize was named the top sustainable tourism destination at the World Sustainable Tourism Awards. So in this case, you can see that all the efforts that the government are putting in place, whether it's policy and so forth, they're actually being fruitful. And there's room for small states to actually be at the lead, to actually be the trendsetters, I should say, with regards to sustainable and regenerative tourism, because they're putting in the work and they're actually seeing the results and they're being recognized for their efforts as well.
Wow, that's really encouraging to hear. So congrats to Belize and Seychelles, and hoping for more upward trend for them. So looking ahead, what does the future hold for regenerative tourism in small states? And what are the key changes or innovations needed to unlock its full potential?
Yeah, I would say looking forward, the future of regenerative tourism, I would say it's looking bright. I think it's a concept which, for many countries, they may have been implementing some of these initiatives, just that maybe they may not, it may not be like said formally, but I think it's something that is definitely now on the back of everyone's heads. People are becoming more proactive towards it. And going forward, I think there's opportunity to enhance these efforts depending on different countries' circumstances, I should say. So going forward to sort of like help leverage this, I think maybe countries can even look into how they can leverage, for instance, let's say technology and that sort of thing, how they can actually build tourism infrastructure, for instance, which is able to withstand climatic shocks. And going back to the issue of funding, looking at innovative funding sources, I sort of like touched briefly on the innovative funding sources, but then just to give an example, one of the other projects that we're working on in the Commonwealth is the Diaspora Investment Financing Project. So basically, this project seeks to unlock a new avenue of financing because we have recognized that funding is an issue in most states. And this could be a potential for countries to unlock funding which would be readily available. And I think this is actually pertinent now, given the fact that with the current political climate, we're hearing issues of funding being cut at the international level. So looking at other innovative sources of funding, I think that'll be crucial to also help countries to advance forward. So looking at some of more innovative ways of financing can help countries actually to unlock the full potential. And also just going back to the issue of education and capacity building, because regenerative tourism is something that even internationally, there's no like agreed framework to what it is. So I think moving forward, there's still room for education, capacity building, and even collaboration across different stakeholders so that everyone can learn from each other and help to map out a way forward.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tamara. It's been really insightful learning from your wealth of experience with Commonwealth small states. And now, so if you could leave a message for policymakers, industry leaders, and local communities about the role of regenerative tourism in building resilient economic ecosystems for small states, what would you say?
Yeah, I would say for each country, regardless of their situation, I think they stand to benefit from regenerative tourism. For instance, regenerative tourism is one of the ways countries can actually become more resilient. This is because it actually helps to sort of diversify within the tourism industry. So the diversification, for instance, we're diversifying into other sectors that may not be traditional tourism endeavors. For instance, diversifying into things such as agritourism, diversifying into other niche tourism industries, for instance, wellness tourism, and even like the community-based tourism. So it's an opportunity for countries to diversify and also build resilience in the tourism industries. And it can actually help them going forward in case there may be a shock going further. And also just to say that I think it's particularly important for countries because at the end of the day, tourists are attracted to the natural resources that most of these countries have to offer. So it is crucial that countries should put in more impactful policies or initiatives that are aimed to protect the environment. Because at the end of the day, if we don't protect the environment, we won't have the very tourism industry that we're striving to protect. So it's like a cycle. So in this case, I think it is very important for the future of the future generations, but then the future of the tourism as a whole. And also just to say that for each country, they're all unique. They'll just need to look at their specific circumstances. You have other countries that are at a more advanced stage. For instance, like Seychelles, they're overburdened with tourism. There's over-tourism. So they actually want to cut back a little bit. And then at the same time, you have other countries who are actually trying to market and have more tourists coming in. They want more to gain from the benefits from tourism. So in this case, it'll be about striking balance to see at which levels are each of these countries and to see which of the initiatives work well and fit with their country-specific characteristics.
Thank you, Tamara, and good luck with the future work in this area. For those of our listeners who wish to read your Small States Economic Review, where can they find it?
Okay, so it's available on the Commonwealth Secretariat website under the publications section. So it's the Small States Economic Review, and the topic of regenerative tourism is under that Small States Economic Review. It's a very interesting report which looks at the socioeconomic trends in small states.
Thank you so much, Tamara, and good luck with all the work in the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you both.
Well, Favour, you know this is a favourite topic of mine. I think you can stick regenerative in front of any sector, and I'm there for it. I'm absolutely up for it. So regenerative tourism and Dr. Tamara setting out the work the Commonwealth Secretariat and UN tourism have been doing, and the thought leadership they've been providing in that space is a real... I think this is a real frontier for tourism. Did you have any kind of questions based on what Tamara was saying, or any further thoughts on that, Favour?
Well, looking forward to regenerative art and regenerative movies, since you are so in love with that title. But yes, this was a very solid episode, and the topic, we really went in depth with Dr. Tamara. And I think one thing that struck me was just the peculiarities of small states. I know we did speak a bit about it in the beginning and the shocks that they are prone to, but how tourism, especially because of the focus on the particular sector, which for a lot of these nations is tourism. And so for me, I would want to hear your own response when it comes to small states and tourism, regenerative tourism. What do you feel like are the biggest factors or the biggest takeaways that should be focused on by these countries?
Wow. One of the things that struck me, and Tamara made reference to it in her conversation with us, is the approach that the Seychelles are taking. So the Seychelles, frankly, they have enough tourists. They have enough people wanting to visit the Seychelles. And there was a wonderful statement which the Minister of Tourism of the Seychelles made in Antigua as part of the SIDS-4 conference, the Global Small Island Developing States conference that happened in 2024. And he said, if people want to go to the Seychelles on a holiday, something along the lines of they have to show that they're sort of show that they're worth it, right? That it's not just anyone that they'll accept to come as tourists to the Seychelles, but you've got to be willing to add that value as a tourist as well. And that's quite a unique perspective. I've never heard that said in that kind of way, but he's absolutely right. Because if you're a small island and you've got such demand for going to your country to spend there, then of course they should be thinking about the quality of tourists as well as the quality of tourism. So those that are able to add something back to the country as part of their visit, those who are able to help restore, repair as part of what they're doing, that is a completely new mindset when it comes to tourism, and one which can add a lot of value. Because if some of these tourists are contributing to projects, whether it's coral reef restoration or replanting of mangroves, all of these things build in additional climate resilience. And that climate resilience are going to leave those countries better off than when these projects haven't happened. And so coming up with creative ways that involve tourism with these environmental projects and also livelihoods for local communities, it's a win-win-win. And so that would be a fantastic direction for all tourism to take in the future. You know, how can you have these satisfying experiences which help these very vulnerable small states help rebuild that resilience and strengthen themselves? So that really strikes me favor in all of this. It's just that story of the win-win-win from the tourism.
Yeah, I think I did have similar takeaways. The fact that these countries know their worth, they are beautiful and they know it, and it's especially because they are small, so they have to protect themselves from people that are seemingly outsiders. As I said earlier, we come and then we leave. And so it's very important that they take these measures to ensure that they are protected no matter the people that come and go. And I think another thing that struck me was when Dr. Tamara talked about the approach that some of the countries were taking towards debt forgiveness, in the sense that instead of repaying, they would enter an agreement to carry out initiatives basically that focus on sustainable tourism or just protecting the environment. Did you want to speak a bit more about that?
Yeah, in a similar way, Favor, we have regenerative agriculture, regenerative tourism, regenerative arts, regenerative we can put a regenerative in front of any sector, right? In the same way, you can put any color in front of a bond and you'll probably find that it already exists, right? So you have green bonds, which are about the environment. You have blue bonds, which are more about the ocean and how you invest in projects which are environmentally strengthening the ocean ecosystems. And Belize did exactly that. They had a blue bond and they linked it to something, as Tamara referred to, as a debt for nature swap. So the idea being you have debt as a nation that you're paying back to debtor countries or multilateral institutions, and you get some degree of debt forgiveness, but on the condition that the money you would have used to repay for that debt goes into local projects that are strengthening those ecosystems, strengthening the environment and building back stronger and better. And that's exactly what Belize was able to do quite successfully. And of course, when you start reinvesting in those environmental projects, those are also an attraction and a draw for tourism as well. So you get these flywheel effects, which we're always looking for with flywheel economics. You get these flywheel effects happening where the investment in the environment is then drawing your tourism, which then is helping to further reinvest in those ecosystems, and again becoming a bigger draw for tourism as well. So it all works out quite nicely from this. And yeah, it'd be nice to see more blue bonds, more debt for nature swaps happening in small states. It's a model that can be replicated. It can go to scale. And it would be nice to see it not just in Belize and not just in the Seychelles, but in many other of the Commonwealth small states and beyond.
I definitely would have to agree. It's one of those initiatives that is like, it's so good in the sense that it's very good for both parties. It's a win-win situation basically. And then I think another thing that struck me was, even though I'm sure the terms are often used interchangeably when we talk about sustainable tourism and regenerative tourism, there is a difference, right?
There is a difference because it's a much higher bar for regenerative tourism. And that's why I'm excited that the UN Tourism Commonwealth Secretariat are taking it so seriously, because if we can raise that bar away from sustainable tourism, which is almost like a do no harm kind of criteria, right? It's make sure that you're doing as little harm as possible, but having tourism primarily as a bad thing for your ecosystems and your environment, but lifting the bar and saying we don't want it just to do no harm or limited harm. It's not just about eliminating plastic bottles or reducing plastic bottles. It's much further than that. It's restoring ecosystems. It's creating jobs and livelihoods, and it's It's using these natural assets that the small states have as a major selling point. It's not just about the beach holiday. It's not just about the spa that you go to in the luxury hotel resort, but you're actually getting out and seeing these key natural assets which make those countries so special. So regenerative tourism is something which I would love to become that industry standard from now on. And it would be great to think when in the future, sustainable tourism will be looked as, okay, it's all right, but that's not what we're striving for. We're striving for that regenerative tourism.
That is such a powerful way to see it. And for me, it's also an emphasis of the flywheel economics principles, one of our core principles, which is viewing economies as ecosystems. Because I believe that regenerative tourism looks at tourism as an ecosystem. And when tourism is looked at through that lens of regeneration, it's a matter of how can we ensure that as an ecosystem we continue to evolve. How can we ensure that we align with nature? How can we ensure that we continue to cultivate what works? We're not fighting against what has already been in existence. And so this is such a good example. This is such a good episode because it's such a good example of the flywheel economics principles.
Yeah. And one of the things which I'd like to also challenge a little bit is I don't think this is just for small states. I think this way of building resilience is applicable for much bigger countries as well, whether that's countries in Europe or whether that's Nigeria, Pakistan, Kenya. There is so much potential around regenerative tourism, and we're only scratching the surface at the moment. There's so much room for innovation in what that means. It's great that the Commonwealth and the UN are starting to think through what a framework of the definition might be. But I think this is also a space where the private sector can take the lead and start innovating, start creating, and coming up with the products which can really be at the forefront of regenerative tourism and what the standards should be. And I'm excited because I do think that's the way the industry will go in the coming years.
That's exactly right. Talking about the private sector and other players coming to play basically within this space, because that is actually a core aspect of regenerative tourism, and it's working. The fact that everybody has to be involved. Yes, the government makes policies, the international organizations like the UN, they make their policies, but what if the tourists don't comply? Then we'll have limited progress. And so it's everybody's game. It takes a mindfulness for the tourists and also the local community as well to say, okay, we love this place, we love this island, or we love this nation, and we want it to continue being the way it is. We don't just want to enjoy it, we want future generations. So it's not like we're telling stories of things that used to be. And so everybody has to be involved, and it's just the marker of any thriving ecosystem that all players have to play their part and play it effectively.
Yeah, and one of the wonderful things in a country like Belize, you see, is that they're not just thinking about sort of green tourism, blue tourism, regenerative tourism. They're integrating as a part of their tourism system what they call orange tourism. Have you heard of orange tourism before, Favor?
No, I can't say I have.
So orange tourism is bringing in the cultural side of things as well. So you're thinking about communities, you're thinking about the rich history and culture that your communities have, and you're bringing that into the tourism offer as well. And I think where you can bring that intersection of the culture, the history, the environment and ecosystems, and of course tourism as a fun, enriching, relaxing experience, then you've got a really unique offering and something worth going to see. And that's how you stand out, right? In a competitive marketplace where you can go to, so many different options of where you can go on holiday. You want to be going to the one which is going to hit all the right buttons. And if you can do that through regenerative tourism, then that's going to put your country in good stead. There are so many countries post-COVID who had tourism booms, but there are a few that do rely on tourism that haven't had those booms. And that's a big question for those countries to ask themselves, is why have they been left behind in these booms? What is it about their offering on tourism that is stopping people from picking that up? And I think regenerative tourism can be a good answer to the question of what more can we do to get tourists to our country. And, that will bring prosperity, but it will bring sustainable prosperity.
Sustainable prosperity. And we're all about that here in Flywheel Economics. This was particularly a really insightful episode, just because once again we're talking about real life stories, countries like Belize and Seychelles, and it was just really fascinating to see. And I hope that our listeners can see that they are stakeholders on this journey to regenerative tourism. They are stakeholders, and so it's just an encouragement to everyone listening that play your parts when next year in that country and even in your own country.
Yeah. And I think this is, like I say, this is at the frontiers of global thinking. So it'll be fascinating to see how the thinking around regenerative tourism evolves over the coming years. But I'm very hopeful and optimistic about it. So thank you so much to Dr. Tamara for giving up her time from the Commonwealth Secretariat to set out the wonderful work they've done. I do urge listeners to check out the report on the Commonwealth Secretariat website, the Small States Economic Review, and look through the good case studies that they have as part of that. Favor, over to you for the ending.
Yes, thank you so much once again, Dr. Tamara. It was such a fun and insightful episode. And thank you, Richard. Enjoyed co-hosting once again. Thank you very much to our dear listeners. We promised that 2025 was going to be even more than 2024 was, and I believe that we're off to a great start. In the meantime, don't forget that you can keep in touch with us by visiting us at flywheeleconomics.com. That's our website, and of course, social media, all our handles at Flywheel Economics. Thank you once again. Until next time, this has been the Flywheel Economics Podcast.